Did you know that leveraging the power of your heart not only makes good business sense because it helps you tap into an emotional intelligence that exists in collaboration with your logical, rational faculties, but it also makes good health sense? There's an increasing body of work that many of you are likely familiar with from Andrew Armour and others, but that's been recently highlighted in Psychology Today when they were talking about the significance of the brain and heart connection. That reminded me of how, when we intentionally leverage our heart, we're not only creating the most well balanced, integrated approach to leadership, but we could very well be enhancing our health outcomes as well. So this article happened to explore just a couple different data points and some research that really looked at how the heart is more than a pump, how it actually is a collection of over 40,000 neurites in that center of our body, and how there's actually a great impact on how this almost like kind of microprocessor of encoding and transferring information from the heart to the brain actually can help us in mitigating stress and pressure as disruption hits us. Now, this made a lot of sense to me as I was reading it because, as again, Andrew Armour and others have shared, there is in the stance between the brain and the heart a lot of information exchanged between these two, and they're not just organs, right? They're actually like centers of information and processing information. And if you think about it, on the day-to-day, stress hits you. Your boss's boss comes in with a challenge or a deadline, and now the timeline that you and your team have to present has shrunk, let's say by 3 or 4 days, and then maybe there's a competitive move in the marketplace and something else gets disrupted. No shortage of stress. We'll throw in there some other kind of personal challenge, right? Schools have closed down with the pandemic, or some other kind of personal health issue, or a family member has a need that you can't attend to. The normal stuff that we're all dealing with today. Now, and some evidence shows that we're dealing with sometimes more than 50 sources of disruption and stress on a day-to-day basis. You're basically bathing in these hormones of adrenaline and cortisol and other stress hormones that are activating your nervous system in a fight or flight response. And the more that we take in information through our senses, sight, sound, and smell, all that information travels up our spinal cord, has to move through that center with the 40,000 neurites before it can hit your limbic brain, and then eventually get to the prefrontal cortex, where hopefully our executive function can take over and we can make rational, kind of very well-balanced decisions. All that information has to, in the form of like blood flow and oxygen and hormones, has to kind of move up in an afferent or ascending manner and move through more than a pump, your heart, where it's making sense of that information as it's passing along to the brain, which is essentially what Dr. Carla Stanton and I, in our mini course, Reset and Rewire, talk about as a physiology-first approach. Our physiology impacts our feelings, which impacts our thoughts, which impacts ultimately our actions. Now, if we can integrate these all together, we can have more emotionally intelligent, conscious, aware responses to stress, and even anchoring into breath in and out of that heart center has been known to actually shift and mitigate the detrimental impacts of stress as measured by heart rate variability the moment that stress is hitting. You can take a look at techniques like the quick coherence technique with HeartMath, as well as many other resonant frequency breathing kind of techniques where you're sort of modulating your breath and actually creating a sense of resonance or coherence in your heart. Now, that practice, even 3 minutes of breathing in and out of your heart with a sense of gratitude, a sense of pausing in the midst of the storm to actually anchor into what you're grateful for, what you are feeling some sense of possibility or flow around, has been shown to actually really reduce and create more resonance in your heart and brain and reduce those detrimental impacts of stress. And that can last for hours. Now, what's cool is if you link that work with some of the work that's been shown by Dr. Lisa Rankin, who had a TED Talk not that long ago, and she talks about when she explored what some of the key drivers to optimal health are, what she found, she thought paradoxically, she thought it would be related to diet or exercise, but what she found is ultimately one of the greatest sources of negative health outcomes is loneliness. And if you think about how that relates to the heart, it's really interesting. And I'll put the link below, but this was related to a 1961 study that was done in a little town in Pennsylvania, Rosetta, Pennsylvania. You may be familiar with this study, but it was a small Italian-American community that at the time had some of the most incredible health outcomes. There was a group of people that had 1/2 the rate of heart attacks as compared with the national average. And the all-cause death rate, when they looked at the death certificates, the death records, so deaths from all different causes, were like basically 35% lower than the national average. And so they began to investigate. A cardiologist at the time began investigating, well, what's the source of this? Like what would generate such a dramatic difference in statistics where there's literally significantly less cardiac disease going on in this community? And they brought in a team of different experts, and a sociologist was also brought in to study, John Brune, and he was looking at this same group of individuals and found there were also social indicators like there was no alcoholism, no suicide at the time, no kind of dire, situations of those in dire poverty or on welfare, very, very little crime. And there were other health outcomes that were also positive, like not too many peptic ulcers, etc. So basically people in this small town were dying of old age and had stronger hearts and other positive health outcomes. So they began investigating why, right? And so before those of you who are Italian American are going to say it was the food, the culture, the Italian wine, right? Which I wouldn't argue. All of those things are wonderful about Italian culture. They also found, well, yes, those things are great, but there's also some side effects with how this group of Italians was living. There was a lot of fat in the diet, a lot of pasta. Some things were being deep fried in lard. There was a certain amount of obesity. There were smokers. So there weren't other, this was not a kale eating, celery juice drinking kind of group. This was a group of people that there had to be something else that was generating these positive health outcomes. So through the series of studies that were done, and again, you can watch the more in-depth TED Talk below, what they found was this was a group of individuals where people just were not alone. They didn't experience loneliness. There was a heart opening with one another. There was exchange. There was a deeper sense of connection. And what resulted was a sense of community up until the very last of their days. A sense of community that today we might argue many of us lack, even pre-COVID, but certainly since the pandemic. There's more sense of social isolation. And when we're faced with these problems, we're trying to grapple with problems in our day-to-day, isolated behind our computer screens on Zoom calls, leveraging the best of our brains, trying to tap into the emotional intelligence of our hearts. But if we're disconnected from others, we may not be coming up with the most integrated solutions, and we may not be impacting our health in the most positive manner as well. So if you think about how conscious, intentional communities can bolster our sense of connectedness, it can also bolster our sense of emotional intelligence, but also our sense of health. And so a practical application for you this week might be, number one, where can I slow down and leverage the power of my heart to do something just so simple as breathing in and out of my heart? Not only will that allow me to pause and mitigate the impact of stress the moment that it hits, and maybe generate more expansive emotions that generate more expansive thoughts, but how might I create a sense of community and connection with those in my workplace? Where have I unintentionally maybe fell into kind of judging someone, distancing myself from one of my team members, perhaps giving a sense of they are other than me, they're not like me, and it closes our hearts down a little bit. Not only if we can find ways to emotionally reconnect with those folks and ask a question out of curiosity and genuine caring, not only will that improve our teamwork, but maybe, just maybe, some of the positive health outcomes that we're looking for in our own lives. Give it a try. Let me know how it goes.